Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really, really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
You're trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong.
Good morning, good evening, good night, Entrepreneurship and Leadership channel listeners on the New Books Network. Today I'm here with Kimon, my co-host, and our guest today is Sophie Adelman. And Sophie, I could introduce you, but you've got quite a varied CV, so maybe I'll do you the honor of letting you introduce yourself in the way you would to someone who, for some reason, had never even heard of you.
That's very kind of you. I'm very happy to introduce myself. So I'm Sophie Adelman. I'm a second-time founder. I wouldn't call myself a serial entrepreneur. Sometimes I get called a serial entrepreneur, but second-time founder, living in the UK. I founded a company previously called Multiverse, co-founded a company called Multiverse, which is building an outstanding alternative to university using the apprenticeship method. So we help young people access the world's best careers at some of the top companies and give them training through apprenticeships. We were trying to build something that's as prestigious as the world's best universities without having to go down the academic route. And I continued that learning theme into my new company, which is very, very early. We're only sort of 3 or 4 months into being live with the platform, and that's called The Garden. So we're building a community for the curious, a place where people who just love to learn, for that joy of learning, can access the world's greatest minds and each other, importantly. So they can learn from leading academics all around the world, and they can also talk to other people who are interested in the subjects that they're interested in. So that's where I'm at. I have 2 small children, one who's 5.5 and the other who's 3. And I, as I said, I live in London, and I'm going to be moving to Germany later in the year as well. So
Oh,
very busy life right now.
I've got a 6 and a 4-year-old, so I sympathize. I sympathize. It's hard. It's hard. Actually, you're in a workspace. Is that where your startup is, or is that just a workspace, or where are you? Because I have the problem. I had to come to the office because if I do a podcast with the 6 and the 4-year-old at home, like that's why I'm asking. Is like they're coming in. I mean, they'll show up. No.
So I actually run a remote team. So my company right now is remote first, we call it. That was partly a function of the fact that we started it during lockdown, so we had to be remote. But we decided that rather than being a company that was going to be hybrid, we wanted to be a company that was remote first. We come together for on-sites at various intervals of every week or every 2 weeks currently, and it allows people to be a bit more flexible with their lives, but it still allows us to come together and have those creative moments, those brainstorming moments, those collaborative moments that I think are really important to an early stage company. So normally I work from home, but luckily I have a very tall house and my office is right in the eaves of the house, so I stay far away from the children during the workday.
I think we should bookmark, Richard, this. I want to come back, but I know we have to. I know we have to dig in to understand and to learn more about Sophie. And by the way, my daughter's name is Sophie, so it's really easy for me to remember your name. But I think we should bookmark the culture, because she just started to talk a little bit about, and I think it's a super interesting thing, is how do you, because I find it one of the challenges actually is how do you actually have a culture when you're, let's say, remote versus, but let's bookmark that for now. And I'll let you do your intro questions. How did you become?
Well, we will come back to culture, because culture is, I define it as shared experiences, and if your shared experiences are online, that's a pretty different place than people have been historically. So one of the things would like to know is about what it was in your upbringing, childhood, in terms of role models or school friends or inspirations that led you to be an entrepreneur now, in terms of early life influences. And would your parents or your siblings be surprised to discover you're running a company now, or were you the sort of kid who was always doing things on their own and sort of unconventional, striking out on a different path?
Well, I'll answer your first question. Did I have any role models? And the answer was no. No one in my life, no one in my family, no one that I can remember until I would say I was in my late 20s, ran a business, or was an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship wasn't even a word that I was familiar with probably until I was in my late teens. My family are all doctors and nurses. We've got an engineer somewhere in there, but no one ran a company. And I was very academic at school. I really loved studying. I think I thought I was going to go and eventually do a PhD or something like that. I didn't really know what I was going to do, quite frankly. So no, there was nothing in my early childhood that would have pointed me in that path. And that's why I think it took me a long time to get to entrepreneurship. So I was in my early 30s, I don't know how old I am now, but I was in my early 30s when I first started working in the kind of startup space. And it was a couple of years later that I started my own company, Multiverse, and then obviously I've continued the trend. But I didn't really understand what it meant to build companies. I got that first taste of that actually working in a finance firm where we were building joint ventures and other kind of businesses within the business. And my boss was actually an entrepreneur. He was an entrepreneur who built finance companies. And so that was my first taste of this idea of, oh, you could start something and build it. And how exciting is it to like build something, create something, leave something in the world. And so from there, I then went to work for somebody else's company in the startup space, a company called hired.com that was building a tech recruitment platform. I launched their UK business for them and built out the team. So sort of always felt like I had experience of building a business kind of on somebody else's dime. And then once I scratched that itch, I was like, okay, now I want to go and build something myself. And it did it then. But I think a lot of people say, oh, I had the lemonade stall. Nothing like that, sadly. But to your second question, would people be surprised? I think the answer is no, because my mum would always say that I'm a leader. I've always sort of, probably she would have said I was quite bossy, but we don't use that word in my house because it's quite gendered. So I'd say I'm assertive, and when I have an idea about what I want to do, I'm unstoppable. So I think that was a trend. I'm always the one to corral the troops. I'm always the one who says, right, let's do it then. What are you going to do? I'll do this, you do that. Like, let's get on with it. And then at university, I was my college president. So I like standing for positions where I can get stuff done. In fact, that was the phrase that sits under my name in my college yearbook. It says, "Don't worry, I'll sort it." And sort of the underlying message is, I like to get stuff done. And I think that's what being a founder is all about. It's about getting stuff done and creating something that doesn't exist in the world.
Good. And were you competitive? And obviously your CV suggests, and you mentioned you're academic, which is very much associated with individual, well, for some people, academic success is about being cleverer than everyone else in the class. It's not necessarily profound thinker, but just someone who does better in exams in school and university than other people. And you had a fairly sort of elite type education. So were you competitive, or did you sort of study for the love of studying, or was it seeing your name at the top of the list of results that motivated you?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I am competitive. I wasn't someone who particularly participated in team sports. Music was more my thing at school. I like studying. I like learning. I mean, that's been the thread throughout my life. And, I think, Richard, you and I talked about the number of books that we both read, and I'm always reading. I just love learning. So there was an intrinsic reason for doing it, and that's actually something that I care a lot about. This the way that learning makes you feel, and the confidence it gives you, and the joy it gives you as well. But there's also an extrinsic motivation in this. I like doing well, and I was good at exams. You're probably right. I may not have been the most original thinker, but I was good at passing exams, and so that's sort of what motivated me. I like the recognition that it gave me from teachers and my parents.
So
there's clearly more to it, though, than just being competitive or setting up the lemonade stand. I mean, as you said, I mean, I'm just trying to, I mean, just like taking it forward, like, so you would, whatever, so you were good at school, and then, I mean, obviously you people were turning to you and counting on you. It sounds like people were counting on you, whatever, whether they were in groups or like you were the person people would turn to get stuff done, whether it was in study groups or I'm sure there was other situations. And then how did you what did you actually study at university?
I studied geography. So
okay, see, I love that.
I like learning about the world and people.
Right.
It's a pretty broad subject. It allows you to study for its benefit.
So then like you graduated, I don't know what age you graduate at there, probably like 22, 23, and you have this geography degree, and then what?
And then what? Well, back in the day, because I'm so ancient now, there wasn't really such a thing as careers advice at university. I mean, I think basically you could go to this small room down by the river, and they had some pretty old books and about law, and consulting, and banking, and medicine. Basically, the sort of something accounting. And I didn't really want to do any of that, so I didn't really know what I would do. And then I got this opportunity. I applied for a fellowship to go and study at Harvard for a year. So I thought that sounded amazing. I didn't think I'd get it, and I managed to get it. So I went out to Harvard, having spent 3 years at Cambridge working very hard. And a lot of people say, oh, I didn't do any work at university. That's not me. I worked very hard. I spent a lot of time in the library. I worked very, very hard because actually when I started at university, I was quite a long way behind, I guess, a lot of the other students. I went to a rural state school, and I didn't find it easy the first year at university. I didn't know how to write the essays. And there's actually I don't know whether either of you have read Steve Schwartzman's book about his career. A lot, I wouldn't necessarily say the whole thing is amazing, but there is this story that he tells about when he went to university and he was basically failing out. He didn't go to a great school growing up, and he was basically failing out in his first year. And one of his professors took him aside and said, first of all, I'm going to teach you how to write, and then I'm going to teach you how to learn. And really what he was saying is, I'm going to tell you the answers, and but I'm going to teach you how to construct an essay. And then once you know how to construct an essay, I'm going to teach you how to think. I'm going to teach you how to learn. And I think that was a little bit how it was for me in my first year. I didn't really know how to do this thing because I'd never operated at that level. And so I had to work quite hard. So Cambridge was all about getting my head down and trying to pass these very difficult exams. Harvard was this opportunity to do what was a graduate fellowship. Most people do it as a bounce off to go and do a PhD or something. I took classes in everything. I took classes at the Kennedy School, I took a philosophy class, I took a French class, I did psychology, I did anything and everything that was interesting to me, because there was no degree at the end of it. It was, you got a sort of certificate of attendance. And first of all, that was just, what an opportunity. It's just insanely amazing to study from some of the world's greatest minds and have that access. But also, I got the opportunity to expand my worldview. Americans are always said to have this can-do attitude. And I think that is even more prevalent at somewhere like Harvard, where literally people think they can change the world. I mean, it is a very privileged environment. Don't get me wrong. I was classmates with people whose parents were billionaires and people whose parents were senators and this kind of thing. And there's little me from like a tiny village in Lincolnshire. But that made me think, okay, well, if they have the confidence and think they can do it, maybe I can do it too. And it was the first time I had that feeling of I could do more. And that really set me up to do things with
What was the difference between, just briefly, because this really isn't what, but we are going to probably talk about learning in education as well. But I just can't help but ask, what's the difference? What was the difference between the Cambridge and Harvard? Like, how were they different?
So different. So in the British system, or at least I can only really talk about the Cambridge system. I don't really know anything else. So first of all, terms are very short. They're only 8 weeks. They're very intense. So you You normally have one essay to do a week, and for each essay, you are given a reading list, a really long reading list with a bunch of books, a bunch of articles, at least in a humanities subject like geography. I think also in some of the science subjects as well. And you are told, and you're given, at least in geography, you're given the title of the question for the essay. So postmodernism is the new modernism discussed, something like that. And then this is the reading. And you were left completely to your own devices. So you would run off to try and find these books and articles in all the various libraries around the university. It was like scramble to try and find the various books. I mean, half the time you couldn't find them because somebody else got there first and like snaffled it, taken it out for a month and didn't return it. And then you had to just go and construct this essay, and you didn't really get that much help. And then you had to sit in a room, it's called a supervision. You sat in the room with the world's expert who'd set that essay question and discussed it with them, probably when you were hungover. And it was terrifying, but it was actually also very incredible.
Yeah.
At Harvard, and also the other US institutions I went to, when you started a course, you went and got this book of all the pieces of, all the materials you needed to read for that course. Like, it was spoon-fed to you. It wasn't even the book. It was like, these 3 pages in the book that you need to read. And then everything was about submitting pieces of work. So it was, a lot of the time it wasn't even what grade you got. You just had to submit the work. And there was so much more focus on doing things together with other people in these sort of like study groups. And that was completely foreign to me because I basically had to do it before. So it was very, very different. Also in terms of breadth as well, because in the UK system, you specialize very early. And in the US system, you continue to take math and a language and English.
Yeah. No, in terms of that, I was sort of wondering how the teaching was. And that is actually very interesting because I think that what you're describing that you were doing in Cambridge gives you the opportunity to think on your feet. You have to, like, if you're in there with the professor or whoever, you have to basically be able to like you might be really, like, some people I can imagine could write something brilliant, but if they have to go and like talk it through with somebody, that's a huge difference. And so that's clearly a skill. And but then on the flip side, this working in groups, which is something that basically is key to life. Basically, working in groups is the thing you're doing there. So that's kind of really
totally. I'll just stop on that. The point about and I went through a sounds slightly more privileged version of schooling than Sophie did, but we were both at Cambridge. That it's so much to do with individual success. You know, in academic terms and in business, it's not about being better than everyone else in the room. In fact, there's a sort of commonplace saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, because the real skill is to get together with people find people who are better than you, persuade them to work with you, and sort of hang in there, keeping them all happy and motivated. But I want to jump back a bit. You talked about how your mum thought you were a leader, and it also sounds like it's too gendered to say bossy. Being assertive isn't being bossy. It just means being clear about what you want and how you're going to get there. But did that mean that you were actually sort of coordinating the work of other people, like scouts or like voluntary groups? I mean, I'm just being an annoying sister and telling your sisters or brothers what to do isn't being a leader necessarily. So how did it manage? Why did your mum say that, do you think? Or were you a self-starter? You would sort of go off and do stuff that other people weren't?
I'm definitely a self-starter. If I have an idea, I'll go and start it. I think I just sort of coordinate things. So, for example, I had a job, right from the age of sort of 14, I'd organize it myself. I'd get myself there. I'd work. I've done lots of jobs. I've worked in factories. I've worked in nursing homes. I've worked in bars. I've always had that feeling of sort of wanting to be independent and having a job and
But you didn't refer to that when you were talking about role models, and I see. So as you were working in a factory, you weren't sort of processing like, I wonder what it's like to run this factory, or
No, but I do think that there's a huge value in, and I actually recognize that as well, because I also was to some extent that way, showing up like showing up is so underrated. Like so many people just can't show up for something. And like, you know, and especially you're a teenager, you know, you've got lots of other things to do. So showing up, and really, it's about discipline. I mean, that's that you're actually disciplined enough to do something. So that is, I'd say that that's one of the things, Richard, that you're looking for of these little, I mean, I think that's definitely one of those things.
And they're showing up, but also, I mean, we had one person on our podcast, and she had described how she came from a farming family somewhere in the Midwest, and she describes like didn't even know what I think she didn't know what a job was or something. But she needed money, and she wandered down the high street of just like handing in a resume at random, just having the self-confidence to, because it's a sales thing. You're not selling a product. You're effectively selling yourself in a sort of, or, you know, you can do something useful. So getting those jobs is a kind, I particularly for people who are a bit younger listening to this, it's a type of entrepreneurship to go out and get yourself a job when you're a kid, because, you know, not everyone does. And if you do, you're doing stuff that wouldn't happen unless you took the initiative.
I just say there's two parts to it, because I think there's the talented people that get the job and don't show up.
So I think my first company was an apprenticeship business, Multiverse. You know, we work with a lot of young people, and we found that a lot of the people we worked with, we'd match them to an opportunity, an incredible opportunity, working for like an incredible company, doing exactly what they wanted to do, and they wouldn't show up for the interview. And the excuse would, well, if we could get hold of them, the excuse would be, you know, my grandma was sick or my dog died, all these kind of excuses. And actually what it came down to was confidence. And so a lot of what we had to work on with them was their confidence, the feeling like they could actually do this, and that we believed in them and they weren't going to fall on their face. Because a lot of the young people that we were working with, and I absolutely wouldn't put myself in that category, were like incredibly underprivileged and come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and many of them didn't have the confidence. They hadn't been told they were going to be a success, and a lot of what we could do was support them on that journey. And then once they got to the interview, they did really well. And so you would expect it to be that they wouldn't perform the interview, but it actually was getting them to the interview that was the biggest thing.
That's interesting. So, sorry, Richard, are you done with the childhood? Because I sort of am curious how yeah, exactly. We're really professional here, Sophie. We're like really just very systematic, and we're gonna challenge you, because I want to get to like you graduated, so you did Harvard, you have this geography degree, you have the experience of like studying all these wonderful things that you're interested in, which sounds like a wonderful thing to do, actually. Like, I want to learn all this stuff that I'm interested in at Harvard of all places. And then what?
Well, then I actually had a place to do a master's, and I decided I was done with education. I didn't want to go back to writing essays and taking exams. And so I was a bit stuck, because I landed back in London after this incredible year and deferred this master's place at LSE. I needed to get a job, and I didn't. All my friends were starting graduate schemes, so I missed the boat on that. And so I think I found a job in the back of a newspaper, or in the back of the Guardian, or the Times or something, when before it was all sort of online. And the job that I applied to and got was at a company called Worldwide Business Research, which is a conference company. It's now part of IQPC. And I always point back to this. People don't think this is my first job, because they hear that I worked in banking. But my first proper job was working in conferencing. And although I say, the point where I really started to understand what entrepreneurship was and building companies was in my late 20s, this was actually my first real experience of building a company, because building a conference is like building a company. You get given a theme. So in this case, my first conference was defense, logistics, and procurement. And I was told they'd launched it last year. It had done okay, and my job was to 3x it in terms of revenue and attendance. And so, and then I was sent off to start planning it. And the thing about conferencing, and it's a really, really great career to go down if you want to learn about entrepreneurship, because you are responsible as the conference producer for researching the topic, figuring out what the key themes are, and finding the right speakers. So a lot of research, a lot of speaking to people, a lot of sales, effectively. Then you have to work with a marketing team and you have to write the copy for them because they're not the experts on this. They're doing lots of conferences. So you've got to write the copy, learn how to do that. They then did, for that time, mostly direct marketing, so mail shots. Then you had a sponsorship team who would go and sell, but you had to tell them who would be the sponsors who might sponsor this conference. So, all the procurement, all the defense contractors and so on. And then you had an events team that actually, managed the venue and stuff, but you were the face of the conference. And so on the day you turn up, and in this case, we were working with defense organizations around the world. I managed to get 2 5-star generals to join us, one from India, the Indian Air Force. And again, that was all about persistence. It was like, right, I want to get a 5-star general, where in the world? We've got an Indian 5-star general, we've got a Chinese 5-star general. I still have the sort of medal that they gave me to thank me for inviting them to speak at this conference. They sort of came with their entourage, and it was a really great success. And I think that was my first taste of the idea of building a business. But because all my friends were in these high-flying jobs, and I was on 20-odd thousand a year at that point, and struggling to buy soup for lunch, I think my ego got the better of me, and so I started to apply for the milk round of graduate jobs, and that's when I ended up going into banking. And I had a horrible time, and I always slightly regret that I didn't stay in conferencing for a little bit longer.
Yeah, because first of all, that's like, I would call it, you can call it different things, but it's like project management as well. It's like you have to just like, but that's really what entrepreneurship is as well, because you have to put on all these different hats, right? And like, you can do this, you can do that, you can do the other thing. So then you jumped into finance, and like, was that just like a boring like finance job? And the idea was it's like, this pays better, so what was when you said the ego got better of you? Is that really what, or like your friends are all in? Because I sort of experienced that as well. Like your friends are all like doing all this great stuff, and like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think I thought that this was a prestigious job, and it would take me places, and I'd end up being a big shot or something. I had no idea. I didn't know a single person who worked in banking. I mean, my parents actually would tell people I worked in a bank, so they thought I was like, teller or something, because they didn't understand what I did either. I don't think I really understood what I did. I was working in sovereign, the national and agency debt coverage, which is as thrilling. Yeah,
that's not very entrepreneurial, I think, the environment. Did you
just to say, and for our non-British listeners, that for reasons that aren't entirely clear to me, it's perfectly feasible to do medieval history or Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic, and then 2 years later you're working for a famous international investment bank writing reports about debt, and it's ridiculous at one level. And there are many cultures, like the German culture, which regard, it's a bit like being a brain surgeon without being a doctor. They just think it's totally scandalous that someone who hasn't studied economics and finance is collecting fees off global customers when they're not qualified to do that. So this was your story, and how long did you last in this environment? And sorry, are there any takeaways that you think our listeners should learn? Because this kind of happened to be, it probably happens to a lot of people in their life, that they're doing a job and they want their friends to be more impressed by their job and get more money.
At the end of the day, it's all about people you work with. I have friends who worked in banking who had an incredible time because of the people they worked with, and those relationships have endured. I think I have some very good friends who are peers from that experience, but I was in a team that wasn't supportive, and so I do think that whenever you choose a job, it should be about the people that you're going to work with, the culture that you are working in, whether that works for you, and what you're going to learn. And I don't think any of those things mattered to me. And I joined banking in 2007. So
okay, so that took care of that.
That was horrendous. I mean, I lasted 16 months. I quit because I really hated the job. And but during that time, the markets were crashing and people were getting fired all around me. So it wasn't. I wouldn't say I had the normal experience of that.
And so what happened next?
Gosh, I have such a long
CV. Keeman's a great interview. It's like, what happened?
Let me give you the short history between leaving banking and sort of starting my first company. So the short version is After having a pretty brutal time in banking, I just wanted to work with nice people. I think I'd learned that lesson, and ended up being encouraged to go to an interview for a recruitment firm called Egon Zehnder, which is an executive search firm. And they were looking for what they call their first pre-MBA associate, so somebody who could help the consultants with their recruitment. And it was an incredible experience. I mean, I think being so young and having the opportunity to sit down with CEOs and boards and understand how you assess talent, understand how you think about building out leadership teams, learn how to interview really well. These are skills that have stayed with me all the way through my career. I really enjoyed headhunting. In fact, I always say that I'm a frustrated headhunter deep down, and I think that being able to spot talent is one of the things that I'm really good at. So I don't think it was a wasted experience. It was a really great experience. And they actually encouraged me to go to business school. It's not something I'd ever considered doing before, but a lot of the people at Egon Zehnder had been to business school, and they sort of said, well, you should go off and do it, and then you can come back, which I never did. But I applied to business school and ended up getting into Stanford. And a bit like the experience at Harvard, it again opened my mind a bit more. We all know that Stanford is right in the heart of Silicon Valley. And again, this was my exposure to the startup scene, the tech scene, this buzz that you get when you're out.
What year was this?
This was 2010. 2010, I went out to.
Okay, that's a good time.
It was a great time.
To be there.
I remember sitting in Cooper Cafe and Steve Jobs walking past, and at this point he was quite ill. We'd have Meg Whitman giving talks on campus. I mean, we were so lucky to be exposed to some incredible people who were just there. So I think business school for me was a lot about sort of starting to figure out that the sort of tech scene and the startup scene, and that kind of get shit done attitude was going to be where I was going to be happiest. And obviously it's the network you build from that as well.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that network. But maybe just talk us through how how you got where you went from there, but and then how valuable that was. I imagine that Stanford network was quite.
The Stanford network is interesting because at the time, we're all just kids, right?
Right.
So no one's actually that useful when you first leave business school. 10 years later, we're
exactly.
Our 10th year reunion, we've got the CEO of Nubank in Brazil, and we've got people who are partners at some of the big investment firms. So yes, there is an incredible network that comes from that. But they are your friends.
Right.
You bond with them because you all have this desire to change the world. And Stanford GSB, the business school, has this motto that's on this stone in the middle of the business school, and it's so. In the middle of the business school, there's a stone that says, dedicated to the people who, I can't remember, I'll have to find the quote for you, but the motto of business school is change lives, change organizations, change the world. And that motto is definitely something that I live by. I really have drunk that Kool-Aid that my purpose is to try and change lives, change organizations, change the world. It's a very special thing.
And then what? No, you're giving us the short. You're giving us the short form, yeah.
And I think that the takeaway here is that people's lives are not linear. I mean, you do get people who come out of school and start a company, and 10 years later they're ruling the world. But most people have pretty messy lives and careers, and they do lots of different things, and they do things for different reasons. So I came back from business school, and I came back to London because my now husband, who I was dating all the way through business school, was in London. People make decisions that are based on personal reasons as well as professional reasons. I've had plenty of friends over the years who, moved back home because they've got a sick parent, or they've taken time out because they were sick. And sometimes you forget that we have these life ups and downs. And so I came back. At that point, 2012, there wasn't really much of a startup scene in London. So the opportunity to go into a tech startup wasn't really on the radar, and I had this huge debt from business school that I needed to pay off, and so I went back into finance for my sins. But I went to work for a firm called RIT Capital, which is an investment trust, and I worked for one of the most impressive individuals in the world, a guy called Jacob Rothschild. And Jacob has built this investment firm. He's a prestigious investor, and he's a great business builder. And it was very hard working for Jacob because he has very high expectations and he makes very big decisions about many things. But I learned so much working from him. And I remember when I first met him, I was totally overawed. I mean, this guy's a legend. I met him and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to build companies. And I said, come build companies with us. And that's what kind of got me in. But a lot of what we were doing was building investment firms. And whilst I really loved it, I knew that I wanted to go and build.
What did you actually do? I'm very curious about this. What were you actually doing? Like, what were you trying?
Yeah. So we did things like we set up a joint venture to seed hedge funds. So new hedge fund managers who had an idea, an investment thesis, they need to raise capital, and we could seed them and help them raise funds. And so in and of itself, it's an investment firm, but actually you have to create the structure around it. You have to think of a business plan, you have to figure out the financials, you have to find the people, you have to set them up for success. There was a lot of business building in that. We also had access to a number of organizations that were building businesses, and they wanted us to be involved, and so we got in early doors, whether that was a kind of corporate finance advisory firm, we were helping them build that inside. So it was kind of a strategic investment rather than sort of pure play investing.
That definitely seems like it's some good experience for. Like, you're really collecting the experience at this point. I mean, like, just going along, you're collecting a lot of good stuff, basically. I think for when we get to your first startup.
And just to check, I heard that correctly. Is while you were doing that, you were thinking, this is something that I want to do one day or soon, right? That's when it really hit you. And was it a bit of a shock? Was it kind of alarming? Because it's quite, it's a much less secure thing. And if you go and work for Unilever, you can be very, I don't want to criticize big corporations implicitly, a lot of people do, but you can be a very entrepreneurial person in a big private or public company, but you have the umbrella and the cushion and the liquidity, and is going out on your own is a much more scary thing. And did it sort of dawn on you that this was going to be a bit more alarming to do your own thing?
Definitely, and that's why the first thing I did was go be the first person on the ground for a startup that already existed. So it was a very deliberate decision to go and kind of learn how to build a business on somebody else's dime and be that first boots on the ground in a new market. I was seeing friends of mine at that time be Uber launchers, when Uber was starting in sort of 2010, and lots of my business school class went to work for Uber, and they would fly around the world and like land in Stockholm or something and like set up the business. And so I was seeing that and thinking, oh, something like that would work for me. I'd be good at that. I'm good at like getting stuff done. And so the job at Hired was literally a sales job. I mean, I call it a GM, but it didn't start off as a GM. It started off as a sales role. So most of the team were in San Francisco, and my job was to go and find people who wanted to hire software engineers and get them to start using our platform to hire software engineers, and then work with a talent team to sort of work the other side of the marketplace. It was a facilitated marketplace in many ways to start with. And I learned a huge amount. Like I learned about managing teams. I learned about how to think about KPIs, how to push sales teams. I learned a lot of sales skills, more formalized sales skills doing that. And it also took the risk out of it. It wasn't my company. So I think a lot of people think that you don't have a high risk tolerance. You're not an entrepreneur. I think people's risk tolerances change during their life, and sometimes you grow up in a pretty risk averse environment, like I did, and you train yourself to be risk averse by getting all these credentials on your CV, collect these badges, because that provides you with a security net. And then over time, you start to realize that doesn't matter anymore. Maybe you've built enough that you don't need any more, and your risk tolerance changes. And I think that was the point where I went to work for a no-name company, and yet I could still build something and build a reputation. And that kind of gave me that confidence to be like, okay, now I'm ready. Now I feel like I can do this.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that, and it's not binary. A lot of people, people think, oh, you're either an entrepreneur and you never ever work for anyone else, or you're just a corporate slave or whatever. And it's not like that in reality. And you mentioned leadership. You learned about managing people, and you mentioned you were involved in sales. And is it like one thing about leadership and one thing about sales that you think maybe an insight that you've got that might not be insights that other people have, or something that you don't think gets enough attention in terms of how to lead people or manage people? Start with that one.
Can I start with the sales one? Because that's
of course you can. Yes, you may.
A lot of people think that sales is about telling your story. Let me tell you why my product is amazing. And actually, sales is not about telling your story. Sales is about understanding that person's problems. So when I do sales, I start by really spending a lot of time getting that person to introduce themselves. What do they do? What are their objectives? Let me really understand what do you need to achieve here? What are the pain points? What are the challenges you face? What about the other teams in your business? Do they agree? Who are you working with? I want to understand that business, because a lot of sales isn't about me then presenting a solution. It's about me saying, you've told me this is your issue, you've told me this is what you need to achieve, you've told me that these are the people who need to make the decisions, and let me use that information to help you. Like, my job is to help you. And many times in sales, you should walk away and say, you told me this, we're not the right solution for you. But if you have that information, you're going to get to a much quicker yes, because you're actually providing something of value. People will pay for something that they value, and if you know what they value, what they need, then it's going to be an easier sale. Too many people, I think there's too much of this, like, inverted pyramid.
Yeah. Because I know exactly. I mean, I feel very strongly. I'm actually very much into sales as well, and it's like, nobody cares about you. Let's be honest. Everybody cares about me. Let's talk about me. That's what I want to talk about. And I don't want to talk about you. I don't care about you. You talk about me. And that's like the ultimate like essence of what I think what you're trying to say is, like, I have my problems, and like, what are you going to do about my problems? Because you come in with your cookie cutter, whatever thing. And it's like, I don't care. That just doesn't do anything. Yeah. So, and unfortunately, a lot of salespeople don't, I mean, that sounds so simple. We sit here and we nod our heads, but how many, like, it still happens all the time. I mean, it's like all the time. So
I get cold emails from people every week. You know, they send me an email saying, let me tell you about my company and why you should buy my product.
Who cares?
And sometimes I actually respond and say, you've probably checked out my CV and you know that I actually work in this space, so please don't try and sell me this product. Yeah. My suggestion is that you do your research before you and send a targeted email. Send an email that explains to me why I'm the person that you should speak to, and why it's going to be valuable for me.
I went to a brilliant sales training about 15 years ago when I was running, in fact, a company, Keeman and I, Keeman's the majority shareholder, I'm a minority, that was doing consulting. And having worked in consulting just after university, they never taught me anything about sales. I was too junior, but there was this incredible sales training by a company called Top Consultant. I don't know if they still exist, but this very sort of squat, short, unglamorous looking trainer just took us through the basics of when you walk into the room, you are not allowed to get a laptop out. You know, leave your laptop in your bag just as you walk in and say, look, I really appreciate you must be busy, so thank you so much for giving the time. I've got a presentation with some ideas based on what I saw on your website, but before I even go to that, just tell me why you agreed to this meeting in the first place, and then we'll take it from there. And then she said, and then you just shut the fuck up.
This is so funny, Richard. It's hilarious because, like, when I was CEO and like when the company was smaller, and I used to go and like, let's call them more junior, they're not in the company anymore, more junior salespeople, whatever, but literally the salesperson would be taking the laptop out to do the presentation. And I would be like, they felt extraordinarily uncomfortable if they couldn't do the presentation. And I'm like, this is a hugely success. Like, I've managed to do this meeting thanks to, basically I was there and I was just like, no. And it was just like, and I managed to do the meeting without the laptop. And so that's a successful meeting. I mean, but it's incredible, really. It's actually incredible that's not, it feels so normal, like obvious, but it's somehow.
But you know,
never take a deck to a meeting. Never take a deck to a meeting. And I think there's so many salespeople that use decks as crutches in order.
It's a crutch, exactly. It's a crutch, and then they go, and then I have my presentation. You're right. You shouldn't have it. You're not allowed to take your laptop to the meeting. That's a way better meeting. I mean.
No, I think we're all on the same page, and this is so important. And sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm a product guy. I don't like sales." If you don't like sales, you probably shouldn't be in a business, because that means that you don't have the ability. You don't have one of the key business skills, which is to get other people to buy whatever it is, to want to buy. Whatever it is that you've got for sales. And if you're I think that. So thank you for sharing that. And there's plenty of stuff you can find out about B2B sales, including good stuff. But I think if Sophie has qualified herself as a world-class B2B salesperson with that answer. What about managing other people? Because I think your answer was so good on the first question that I've now got extremely high expectations for your answer on the second one. I have no idea what you're going to say.
Oh gosh, no, you raised the bar. So I think I've learned a lot about managing people. It's still an evolving journey. I wouldn't say I'm the world's best manager by any stretch, but I think that what I have learned along the way is that obviously everyone needs to be managed differently, and the best thing you can do is sort of stand with them and share, I think, your own kind of vulnerabilities and your own sort of concerns, bring them kind of into a circle of trust. When I first started managing, I think I kept a wall up. I didn't tell them about anything about my life. I sort of was permanently like on, and I didn't really share when I was having bad days. I seemed to be sort of quite bulletproof, and they wanted to know more about me. They wanted me to sort of let down my guard. And when I started to do that, my relationships were much stronger. I built far more loyalty. And I think that kind of empathy and authenticity is very, very powerful. I know it's a buzzword, authenticity, now, but actually people want to know a real person, and they work for a real person. They don't want to work for a robot. So I think that's something that I try and do now. Sometimes I feel I go too far. I'm like too open and honest. But as a founder, at least, you don't know the answers. In fact, most of the time, you have no idea what the right answer is. And the way I think about it is, I don't have the answer to the question. Opinions are equal. Everyone in this team will have an opinion. Some people will know more than others. So if they know more and they have like the data to back it up, then data wins. But in the absence of data, when all opinions are equal, we could spend hours, arguing about opinions. So in that situation, for efficiency's sake, sometimes I'll make a decision. It might not be the right decision, but I'll make a decision. Now, I'm only doing that so we can move forward. But if you can provide data to prove that wrong, please do. That would be wonderful. If I don't have to make a single decision, then we're in a brilliant situation. So I think that's something I've learned over time, to be honest, that I just don't know the answer. And we're all trying our best to figure it out.
It certainly makes sense. I now feel pressured to rate your answer. I've set myself up, which doesn't sound very.
Just let go. Just let go. Let's just let it go. Let it go.
Let's just move.
Just moving on.
And so you built up the UK operations for this American company based also in recruitment. So you were headhunting as type of recruitment, obviously. Then this is a recruitment platform. And at what stage were you sort of thinking? No, because it was kind of your own thing, but not really your own thing. And then, when did you? Well, take us through the key moments when you decided you need to move on, and how quickly did you do that?
Well, there are two things that made me move on. One was when you build up a team and you build up a business, and it's not actually yours. At a certain point, you start to become frustrated, often with decision making from leadership, and I think I was starting to question some of the decisions that were being made. So I think that was a push factor. There was another factor, which was I actually had a baby, my first child. While I took a few months off maternity leave, and when I came back, I'd sort of been mulling on it, and I thought, now's the time. Most people would say that is not the time to start. But I'm a bit mental like that. So at a 5-month-old, I decided to join my co-founder Ewan and what was at that time White Hat and now Multiverse.
So when you had a 5-month-old son, daughter?
Daughter, yeah.
When you had a 5-month-old daughter, you decided that that was the time when you're going to do first time founding? Am I getting it right?
That's right. And then
I just want to make sure I got it right. Okay.
I decided to do my second one with the one-year-old.
Imagine people driving off the highway as they're listening to this. So what? Car crashes.
Yeah.
So,
it's been hard.
And what was the impetus? I mean, okay, you've explained the impetus to not do what you were doing. Whatever, you took a break and you thought about it, and it was probably I would put that into maybe satisfaction, whatever bucket. But there has to be more of an impetus other than dissatisfaction.
It's been brewing for a while. This feeling of wanting to build something. I mean, I think it has started sort of when I was out in California. The desire to want to build something and be able to drive the direction, and some of maybe the frustration were just sort of making me really, really want to do it, see whether or not I could do something amazing. And then when I met you, and we met actually before I left Hired, and he'd sort of been working on this idea for how we could build a new apprenticeship business. There was an opportunity, legislative door that opened in the UK, and he had this vision. So Ewan had the idea for White Hat and had started working on it. And when I joined him, we could come together and take that idea of let's build an apprenticeship business to let's build an outstanding alternative to university and really change the entire system. And I think that that meeting was very important because I had a lot of the skills that we needed to sort of operationalize this idea. And Ewan absolutely had the vision and a lot of charisma and connections. He was also a great salesperson. And I think the two of us together really amplified that opportunity, and we were a great team. How
did you take it? How big did you get it? What can you just tell us just a little bit before we get to the current thing? How did you?
So the business was founded in 2016, and we've raised 4 rounds of funding now. Most recent round was $140 million, so around $200 million of total funding has been raised. The business is now 500 people in the UK and the US, working with some of the world's biggest companies, and thousands of both young people and people who are further on in their career who are also doing apprenticeships. Are
you still a shareholder, or are you still?
I'm still a shareholder, very much, and I'll always be a co-founder. But I decided to step back about 18 months ago because I wanted to start something new, and Ewan continues to be the CEO and lead that business. I stepped down.
Now I'm really curious, and if you don't feel comfortable sharing, I'm not going to ask about money or anything like that, but I'm just curious how. Because this is just curious how it works. I assume in one of these rounds, did you get some kind of a partial exit that allowed you, or you just said, no, I'm just leaving it here. I'm leaving it all here and I'm going off and doing my own thing. I'm just curious, how does it work? How does it work?
I think I don't think it's a good idea for founders to take money off the table in the first, in the early stages of business, but founders generally underpay themselves. I always joke that I take a pay cut in every single job that I've ever taken.
Yeah, exactly.
As a founder. And so there does come a point where maybe in the 3rd round or the 4th round of funding, I think you're justified to take a little bit of money. And it's probably the smart thing to do as well, to de-risk yourself.
It's a hedge. Yeah, it's a hedge.
Mm-hmm. And so the majority of my shareholding remains in the business, but I have taken a little bit off, and that allows me to live my life and to pay for childcare, to continue to build businesses. So
I was thinking, for the next thing, you need some money it's easier. Obviously you can do everything without money, but it's easier it's much easier when you have money. So that's why I was.
It's also possible to make bigger mistakes if you're self-funded as well, because you don't get that scrutiny.
Very true. That's very true.
Yes. So this, and in terms of, and we won't spend too much time on this, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand. Obviously, you raised a bucket load of capital. I think you said $200 million. But how was it making money? Was it like a fee for each apprentice from these big companies? So you'd like have 100 people going to wherever, Unilever or whatever, and they'd pay you £1 million, or where was the money coming from in terms of the real business?
Well, for a long time, we were like, it was a lot of hard graft. So it wasn't a case that we were getting in the early days, the £1 million deals. I think they are doing it now, and the team there is phenomenal. So I take my hat off to them. They've done incredible things. So the way that we made money was two ways. One was we did charge a placement fee for when we helped match apprentices to opportunities. But that wasn't where the majority of our revenue came from. The majority of our revenue came from delivering apprenticeship training to the company, and that was partly funded in the UK at least by the company's apprenticeship levy, which is pot of money that was available only for training apprentices. And in the US, it's it's a different structure. So we were paid throughout the duration of the apprenticeship. It wasn't like, please deliver this training, here's some money, go off and do it. We would only get paid if we delivered high quality training throughout the course of the apprenticeship, and the apprentice remained on program. So it was a pretty regulated operation, and I'm really, really proud that the team was able to achieve Ofsted Outstanding. It's actually an education business and regulated by Ofsted. And after preparing for it for years and years and years, we finally got inspected, and they achieved Ofsted Outstanding last year. So it shows the quality of the training that the team's doing.
So basically part of the corporate training budget of companies, you've just muted yourself, Sophie, so you might want to, part of the corporate training budget of employers was landing in your bank account, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay. And then, I don't know, is there anything more to ask about this, Kimon, or should we move on to the business?
No, let's focus on where you're at now and the exciting stuff you're doing now.
So you took some money off the table, you were ready for your next thing, and that was the CEO, the visionary, and you felt that I mean, maybe you don't want to talk about it, but was it like you actually wanted to be the CEO or for the next thing, or? Well,
no, yeah, let's start it. Are you the founder? Like, are you the sole founder?
I have a co-founder.
Okay.
So actually, this is a really important point to make. So when people choose co-founders, I sort of, you and I sort of chose each other, but I think, it was a chance meeting in some ways that led to that. We weren't both seeking out a co-founder. I think I thought I was going to start a business on my own. And I met Ewan, and our skill sets were quite complementary, which meant in the early days, the first few years, actually it was a bit like having two of yourself. If I couldn't go to a meeting, Ewan could go. If Ewan could go to a meeting, I could go. We both were good at recruitment. We both were good at speaking to investors. We could do a lot of the same things, and that was a multiplier effect. But as you start hiring senior members of the team who have specialist areas, then that multiplier effect starts to wane, and you have, Ewan's been the CEO all the way through. I was running a lot of the day-to-day of the business. But as we started hiring those senior executives, I could see that my role was probably going to become a kind of COO, which I didn't really want to do, or it's going to become like a special project, other floating co-founder. And so it just felt at the right time for me to say, the team's in a really amazing place, and you can see that with what they've done over the last 18 months. It's time for me to decide to do something new. And I did want to be a CEO of a company. So I think sometimes women feel a little embarrassed to say they want to be the boss, and I wanted to be the CEO of a company, and there wasn't going to be that opportunity at White Hat, which is Multiverse, which is the right thing. Ewan's the CEO. So I decided to step back, and I stayed on the board for a year, stepped off when I started The Garden. So after that, one of the investors that invested in Multiverse, Index Ventures, invited me to come and be an entrepreneur in residence with them. So I did that for 6 months. And
what does that mean? Just so in fact, I don't even know. So the listeners may not know, but I don't know as well. So
entrepreneur investments was a wonderful opportunity. It means different things at different venture capital firms. Not all firms have it. It's not a requirement. But basically, it meant that they wanted me to help them with some of the portfolio companies that they had, with some of the investments they were looking at, where I have special expertise. And they also wanted me to think about what I wanted to do next. There's an opportunity for me to decide if I wanted to build again. There was no pressure. It was just an opportunity for me to take a time out and figure out what I wanted to do next and be hopefully useful during that time, which I don't even have to ask them if I was, but it was great.
But from their perspective, I think strategically, it was also like, okay, we've got this talented person that's going to do something next, and I want to have first. And I don't know if they did get first dibs. I'm just on investing in the next thing. But like from that perspective, it's not a bad move.
Yeah, I think there's always reasons like that.
Yeah.
So,
usually towards the end, we ask people for recommendations of other entrepreneurs, but it's struck. I'll say it now that just not now, but please make a mental note that if there are people from those days who you think would be potentially interesting for our listeners, the people basically they need to be somewhat successful, when we are someone who's built something on their own or something very interesting. It doesn't have to be massive scale, but we're looking for people who've successfully got something interesting off the ground, and if it's doing very well, that's all to the good. So where did the idea of the garden come from, and what is it? Imagine that we don't know.
Sure. So the idea for the garden came about because I just love learning. I'm always learning, and during the lockdowns, I realized that people were spending a lot of their time that they had, free time that was coming up learning. And obviously a lot of the offline things that were happening moved online. And a lot of people who hadn't really been exposed to online learning were starting to do more of it. But there was this really interesting stat I found, which was 200 million people outside of China sign up to online learning courses, these MOOCs, online learning courses. But only 3% ever finish a course. And what that tells you is that there is this huge desire to learn, but that something that's not being served. Like, they don't actually want to do a course. They don't want to become, a physicist. What they want to do is learn why the world exists, or they want to understand what a black hole is, but they don't really want to go further. And I think that's why you see this rising popularity of things like documentaries and podcasts. And when I started thinking about that, I was like, well, yeah, everyone loves to learn. My parents love to learn. I love to learn. I'm always reading books. I'm always listening to things. I'm sure your listeners fall into this category of very curious minds. And I think that the curiosity is something that's very intrinsic to humans. I mean, I've got children, they're always asking why, they love to learn, but they wouldn't call it learning. They're just curious about the world. And I think a lot of us have started to confuse learning with education, and we're all scared and bored of education. But actually, curiosity is kind of learning for joy. It's about just scratching that itch. So that was sort of part of the idea for the garden. And really what it came down to was I read this book about this Greek philosopher called Epicurus. And Epicurus, I'm not going to give you the 101 on his philosophy. There's some interesting stuff in there. He believed the purpose of life is pleasure, but we need a longer time to talk about that. What was interesting to me about Epicurus was he had this place outside Athens, a physical place that he brought people together in. So it was a garden outside Athens, walled garden, and it was called the Garden. And it was a place where people came together to eat and to drink and to discuss ideas and to hear from the great teachers. And it was kind of a convivial community of learning, a convivial community of curiosity. And at a time when society was incredibly stratified, you had 3 rich men and then everyone else. This was a community that welcomed everyone. So it didn't matter whether you were a slave or a woman or a rich man, you were welcome in the garden. And I thought, we need that. Why do we not have a modern version of the garden, a convivial community of learning that brings people together, where people can participate, where anyone's welcome, where they can learn from the great teachers? And that's where sort of the idea was born for the garden. So what we do is we bring the world's greatest minds, academics, other experts, out to the institutions and into your home. It allows people to watch live talks and conversations and to participate, to ask questions to these world experts, to have them answered in real time, looks like Netflix quality, and to participate in conversations with other members. And that's what we're trying to build with the garden.
That's awesome. I'm a big, lots of things are coming to my head, actually, because this is an area where Richard and I talk a lot and are a bit, so I think we're both proponents of education. We think there's a lot that can be done with education, basically. And I personally I absolutely like to learn random stuff, literally random stuff that's not it's not just in any particular bucket. So, I mean, but like, so this business basically, I mean, I assume it's just going to become, or like the goal is, it's sort of going to be a subscription, like ultimately you'd be subscribing to the service, to whatever it is, and then like there'd be regular talks, and then you're on the talk. You have an interactive element.
Right.
Is there any limit to the because I guess always in these situations you have like you'd have to limit do you have to limit the number of people, or do you have a premium level that they can ask? Because if you have too many people, then everybody can't ask questions, or does that?
So right now we have we're about 5,000 members, so it's not a huge community yet.
Right.
We only started a few months ago, so it's grown pretty fast in that time. But
Yeah,
still,
that's amazing.
So we run about 3 to 4 live talks a week currently, and they primarily fall into 2 buckets. We have what I call topical talks. So these are not news talks, but we take a topic that is currently relevant, topical. So right now we've got a talk this week coming up on the psychology of a dictator. So understanding the mind of a dictator. Obviously,
that's useful. That's very timely.
very timely, but it's not newsy. We're not looking at it from the point of view of like what's going to happen next. It's actually looking back and saying what can we learn from psychology, what can we learn from history to understand how people become dictators, who can become a dictator, what is it in the psychology of a nation that allows somebody to become a dictator? What lessons can we learn from that? So we bring these experts, the world experts, to talk about that. At the moment, we have a few hundred people turning up to each live talk, and then people can watch on demand. But the way that we've built it allows for community involvement in deciding which questions get asked. So you're right, anyone can ask a question, but the best questions rise to the top because they're voted up by the community.
So there's a whole okay there, and so
interaction.
it's an app. It's like an app that's okay. So how do I sign up for this thing? Where what's it
now? Go ahead. I would love you to sign up.
Well, what's the website? Like where do you sign up?
Sign up at www.onegarden.com. So that's
One Garden. Okay, onegarden.com. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes.
Yeah, please do. Currently free for founding members, so you can sign up right now, and you can watch some of the on-demand videos. They are videos. They're not. There's nothing sort of particularly exciting other than you get to listen to these incredible experts. And
do they have the question? Have they been recorded versions where there's the interactive questions that are?
You can listen to the questions that other people have asked.
Okay.
And then we're creating circles around each of the talks as well, so people can actually share articles and their opinions and start to have conversations about the topic.
And you've got, I guess, and we could go into the weeds of, your strategic options and how you certify people and how you curate it and how you choose the topics and whether you're going to partner with universities. And when I spoke to you a few weeks ago, you said, it's quite early stage. There's a lot of decisions you haven't taken, you're still iterating and sort of finding things out. But in that context, are the things that you and your co-founder are sure about, that you definitely are going to do this, or we're not going to be that, because some kind of your sort of, what do people say, your North Star? I've heard people say that. I've never quite known. It's not a phrase I grew up with, but I've heard it quite a lot with
because they haven't been addressing it to you, Richard.
No one cares about my North Star. That's why. Now I know.
Well, I think so. We describe the garden as a community for the curious, and that really resonates with people. People are very excited about being part of something that's around curiosity and learning for joy. And when you think about a community, what makes a community? Engagement makes a community. So our North Star is engagement. We want people to be coming back, to be participating, to feel that they are contributing and that they are valued. And so we really look at metrics that focus on engagement, whether it's weekly active users, monthly active users. We look at talk time, how long people stay. I think it's 98% of people who attend one of our live talks stay for the entire talk. And then 85% stay for the full kind of Q&A. So people are not dropping off, they're staying, they're immersed in that experience, they love it. I mean, the feedback is incredible. So I think that's what we focus on in terms of our North Star. But the sort of thesis with the garden is that that learning today is isolating, it is boring, it can be stressful, it can be hard to find like high quality content, whether that's visually or audibly high quality, but also not always knowing whether that person is high quality, whether or not they truly have expertise. There's so many people who stand up in soapboxes and social media now and proclaim to be experts, right? I don't proclaim to be an expert in anything. So I'm very much a jack of all trades. And I think sometimes it's difficult to know who's a true expert. And so what we've done is focus very much on academics. That doesn't mean we won't go into other forms of expertise, but deep expertise, people who've been working in an area, studying a subject for years and years and years, and not only can talk about one specific issue, but have the depth of insight to be able to bring out the fascinating details. I mean, if you watch some of these talks, some of the questions that some of our fellows are asked in the Q&A, and it's live Q&A, they don't have any time to think about it or go and look up the answer. Some of the questions are very difficult, very specific, and quite challenging. And our academics can just answer it straight off the cuff because they have the detail at their fingertips. And that true expertise and access to that true expertise is just a profoundly valuable thing. And academics these days are not valued in the way they should be. Experts aren't valued in the way they should be. And we need access to them. And I think channeling that is a very powerful thing for society, because if we can give people anywhere access to these experts and we start to help people think critically and help people start to have constructive conversations, and that we can actually start to change the way that the fabric of society operates.
So the two things I picked up is there's the community aspect of it, that you want learning to be a community activity, not just an isolated activity, and you want to have really good quality experts delivering your talks or workshops. And we had one of the most popular podcasts we've ever had on the show was interviewing a guy called David Spinks, who wrote a book called The Business of Community, and he founded the community of community managers, and it might be worth a listen. He's an interesting, and his book is very good. Yeah, you've got the book.
I mean,
yeah.
The Bible.
Yeah, it's a very, very sort of checklisty, but he made some mistakes about TED and TEDx. So I'm a TEDx. He said that TEDx is a reward, you get a financial reward, which we don't. But generally speaking, I thought it would be extremely useful. And you've just confirmed it is. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And I'm sure that after your podcast has been online for a few months, you'll be absolutely number one, Sophie. But for now, you've got to catch up with David. Suppose it goes really well, and you suppose like in 5 or 10 years time we bump into each other and you say how's the garden going, and you say it's amazing, we're doing X, Y and Z. What would be the sort of things that make you, looking in a few years time, say this really was the right decision? What would be an overwhelming success for you?
No, I care about impact at scale. I want us to change the world if we can, and I think the two ways that we could change the world with the garden is allowing millions of people around the world to learn from true experts. I've been incredibly privileged to be able to access some of these people at some of the top universities around the world. Most people never get to, and that is a real shame. And I hope by doing that we can start to allow some of the knowledge that's out there and the brilliance that's out there to be out in the world, and also to start those conversations. So that would be a wonderful thing if we could have millions of people who are engaged in the garden, feel part of this community and access themselves. But the second thing that I think would be wonderful is if we had, hundreds of thousands of these incredible fellows whose work has been elevated, who've been able to create impact through their work, through sharing it in the garden, who feel valued and have their work celebrated, and that more people are therefore encouraged to go into research and academia as a result of seeing that the profession has been elevated. Because I think right now academics feel beaten down. They're in the UK right now, we're seeing this whole thing about pensions being reduced, and a lot of people are leaving academia. And ultimately, the progress we make in society is partly, not fully, but is partly driven by the amount of insight and knowledge and new learnings that we create. And I think it would be a shame if we lost the academic angle on that front.
So scale and impact and value, you'd like you to get it to a really big scale, and you'd like that to be changing the lives of the people who attend or show up or are part of it, and you'd like academics to be more valued. And could you carry on doing this for the rest of your working life, or do you think you might, like in 5 or 10 years' time, say, I've done this now, and there are some other things I'd like to. I know it may be a question you just can't answer, but do you think this could be a forever type job, or is it too early to say?
I think it's always too early to say. You never know what's coming around the corner. I know that what I love is that I want this to exist in the world, and it absolutely aligns with who I am and what I value. And I think if you have those two things, then it's something you can keep going at for a very, very long time. You never sign up to a startup life unless you're willing to go at things for a very, very long time. But you just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen in your personal life. You don't know what's going to happen in your professional life. You don't know what's going to happen in the world. I mean, there's the macro thing is part of it. But I really hope that this is something that can become a huge success and that people want to continue to exist. So, and hopefully for as long as it does, I can be part of it in some way.
And obviously, with your other companies seeming to do very, very well, can you imagine investing in other startups, being an angel investor and things like that in parallel to what you're doing, or do you want to focus on one thing?
So I already do angel invest. I did quite a lot while over the sort of 6-8 months before I started Garden after stepping back from Multiverse because I had a bit more time. And I love helping other founders. I'm always trying as much as I can to be able to help the companies I invest in. For me, angel investing is not something I do from an investment point of view. I do it because I want to support founders, and the best way for me to do that is to focus the number of companies I help, because I have really limited time. I mean, as I said, I'm running a company and I've got small children, so I barely have a life outside that. So with angel investing, it's about picking a few people that I really feel I can help, whether that's through helping them connect with investors, whether that's helping them think about hiring, whether that's helping them think through some of their strategic decisions, whether that's just being a shoulder to cry on. But I'm quite deliberate about that. So I'm not a very active angel investor. Would I become a more active angel investor in future? Maybe if maybe when the garden's much further on, but I just don't have the time now to do it a lot. But I do love helping other founders.
So, well, it sounds to me that if our listeners hear that and you start getting a tidal wave of proposals to invest from people you don't have time for, then that's probably, you're not encouraging. But I guess it's just a case-by-case thing. If a really great idea popped up on your radar that you liked and you thought you could help with, you wouldn't say no. But you do seem like you've got quite a lot on at the moment.
Yeah, it's rather a lot on right now.
Is there anything about you that we haven't asked that you think our listeners ought to know, or any ideas you haven't had the time to share just by with our brilliant interviewing skills who may not have asked all the perfect questions?
I think you've asked excellent questions. I can't think of anything.
I have a question. I have just 2 questions actually that I've been saving. One, because I'm a big fan of education. Let's just say this whole topic. So you literally went to basically the best schools you could probably name anywhere. And so how helpful was that? And actually to make you who you are today? I mean, would you say that, and like, if you could just remove the connections piece, because that's the one I'd like to remove, and the actual, like what you learned at school versus, because you also had this extensive, like real life part where you actually learned a lot in actually working for other people. And, is it just, it got your foot in the door to those other things? Is that, or did you actually learn stuff like the quality of what you actually learned at these prestigious best institutions? How valuable has it been for you?
I don't remember much of what I learned in terms of the actual knowledge, but what I did learn was how to learn and how to construct arguments and how to write really well, which are all skills that I still use every single day. To your point earlier, I learned a lot about how to be self-sufficient, to pull something together on my own, not to be spoon-fed. I think at Harvard, I really learned about, I broadened my sort of learning, and I sort of a lot of confidence. I don't think I learned anything at Harvard that I applied today. Stanford was more useful because we did actually learn specific things that were really valuable. And there's a particular class at Stanford GSB called Interpersonal Dynamics, otherwise known as touchy-feely, which is a little bit like group therapy. Basically, it's all about how do you build good interpersonal relationships. And some of the skills you learn really do help you with your teams and careers, but actually also helps you in your personal relationships. Because you
I can imagine.
Feedback and very, very powerful. So people always say that, at least with business school, that it's not, most of what you learn at business school isn't particularly valuable for the first 5, 6, 7 years. I actually think I refer back to some things I learned in those classes now, because they've sort of, I've matured and the lessons have matured. But I think it's a lot about teaching you how you think. And I don't think that university has the chokehold on that kind of learning, I think.
Right. And that's exactly what I want to bring it back to. So you mentioned that you want to make, through the garden, you want to make it more accessible. I mean, I think part of what you want to do is make it more accessible. And like you also mentioned that you left Stanford with a lot of debt. And so basically all that stuff costs a lot of money. And because that seems like for me personally, and I've thought about this a lot, it just seems like there should be a better way, basically. So we have the technology now. Why can't we share this like high quality, why can't everybody have the Stanford education, everybody have the Harvard education, everybody have the Cambridge education? And is it transferable? Actually, I'm not going to make a question out of it. I mean, is it do you believe that this is like a possible future and something it is actually transferable? Because, some of it is like you said, the touchy-feely, we get in there, we do like, how much of it how much of it is actually transferable, and how much of it is, sorry, you just got to pay the big bucks.
I don't think that I don't think what makes the experience special is fully transferable. I think you can put all the courses online and people will be able to access them and the learnings you get out from that. But like a lot of the stuff you get, if I'm really honest, it comes from the late night conversations with profoundly
humans being together.
Humans being together. Now, do I think you can create that online? Yes, I think you can if you bring people together for conversations. But what I've been doing for the last 8 years is trying to create ways to democratize access to learning in some way. So apprenticeships is about challenging this one size fits all system of everyone has to be academic and go to university, and if you're not academic, you're not good at exams, then there isn't a route for you. Now, it worked for me, and I've never denied that I've been to some of the world's best universities and it was the right route for me, but that's because there wasn't even another option. And for so many people, the apprenticeship route, if it's seen as prestigious and you've got the community experience, would have been the right thing. I'm deeply passionate about that, and it's the right thing for society to have that route. But equally, I don't think education should stop when you finish at school or university. I think that people should have access to inspiring ideas and great learning and the opportunity to come together wherever they are in the world. And if you live in London like I do, you can go down to the V&A and attend a lecture, or the Royal Academy and attend a talk. And you are surrounded by so much, in fact, so much that you never actually access any of it. But if you live like my parents do in Lincolnshire, or you live in a small town in upstate New York, or wherever you are in the world, most people don't live in a cultural center and don't have access to that. And so my target audience isn't the person who, isn't necessarily the person who, is in the university town. My target audience for the garden is everyone else, everyone who usually feels like a second-class citizen when they attend an online talk that's being filmed from the back of a hall, and they feel that they're not in the room. And I want us to build something that makes everybody in the room.
Yeah, I mean, if you can nail that, is because my father, who did teach at Oxford, used to say to his students in their first, the first week onboarding or whatever, he called it just the sort of first chat. He'd tell this group of 10 or 12 people who are going to read read philosophy at Merton, you're going to learn more from each other than you learn from me and the other professors. And the challenge, if it's a vast community, is how do you make sure, how do you control for the quality of the people you hang out with. And I'm sure there is a solution, but it's an important one because you can only hang out with so many people. And as anyone who's been on a Reddit thread will know, not everyone there is worth spending that much time on. But I think it's a very good, very inspiring and challenging and important goal. And clearly, there are lots of things. I'm involved in TED and TEDx. There's strong evidence. There's a hunger for not unconventional, education learning formats outside the traditional system. And that if you compare a TED talk to a bog standard Cambridge lecture, you didn't mention the lecture system. Not all the lectures are great, even at the top universities, by any stretch of the imagination. So, Kim, we were going to come back to culture, weren't we? With that, you said let's remember culture.
Okay. Yeah, but we probably need to wrap it up. But let's just so you're building your own company now, basically from scratch, and you've done it. Like the timing of what you're doing is obviously post. Can I say post pandemic? I mean, let's just date ourselves. Where we were in March 2022. Okay, post pandemic. I mean, this is something. So I'm like, whatever the businesses I'm involved in. I mean, this is a big challenge because I'm a big believer in culture and people and all this stuff. And we've moved from sort of being traditional office based. So we go to parties, we meet up physically, to now. And I mean, in my case, we're very all over the world. And and that's through acquisitions and stuff. So how do you actually manage remote, if you're setting up your company as remote, and I assume it really doesn't matter if once they're 50 miles away or 10 miles away, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, they're too far away. So how do you set it up and how do you deal with this? Because we've been touching on it a little bit here, is working in groups and the actual physical human thing actually matters. Because I'm gonna say I'm old school as well. I don't say you are old school, but I'm definitely old school. I believe in human face-to-face interpersonal, that makes a big, that's really important for doing anything basically. So
I think it is important for a lot of things,
yeah.
But I don't think it's important for everything. And I think the last couple of years have shown us that actually when you're executing on tasks, actually a lot of the time it's more productive to not be with other people. You're much less distracted, you're much more efficient.
Yeah.
And actually it's good for people's physical and mental health to be able to manage their time more effectively. I know that I have really appreciated being able to not commute to an office for an hour each way every day for the last 2 years. I've seen more of my kids. I've been able to exercise more. I've been able to take, a nap or a meditation when I'm exhausted. My days are probably longer, but I can manage my life a bit more. And I'm definitely much more efficient. But I don't think that you can do everything remotely, because I think sales and building personal relationships and forming those kind of trust relationships are
also team related,
yeah,
similar with being in a team.
Being in a team. So I think a lot of the tools can help you communicate and make decisions. We're always in Slack, we text each other, I leave voice notes, we use Loom, we use lots of different things. But we also come together. So the way that my co-founder and I decided to structure this is remote first. And that means that we incorporate a lot of the best practices for remote companies, making sure that we document stuff, making sure that we turn our cameras on, making sure that we have sort of stand-ups and stuff, so there's communication, but also that we come together. So at this stage, we're trying to come together every 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes my co-founder and I try to see each other more regularly. And those sessions are more about personal relationship forming and brainstorming, collaboration, than they are about all sitting in a room and listening to a presentation. I encourage people to go for coffees, go for walks.
Exactly. It's personal. It's get to know the person. I mean, really,
it really is. So Richard said at the beginning that he believes that culture is about what people do together and how
shared experience. Culture is shared experience.
So I think that culture is built on shared values, and values are all about how you, and that's all about how you live those values. So I always talk about hiring for values fit, not culture fit, because I think the problem is culture fit means like me, shared experience, shared background, shared everything. And so with values fit, you can come from very different backgrounds, but you can have shared values. So I care about people who want to build extraordinary things together. I care about people who are deeply curious. I care about having people who are inclusive and care about belonging and welcoming. Like, these are things that matter to me. Excellence being really important. So I think we hire for values, and then we describe the behaviors that demonstrate those values, and then it's about living it. So it's about doing those things that you describe in the behaviors. And so that's why people would say, oh, the company should come up with the values. No, I think the founders need to come up with the values, because I think the founders need to be living and breathing them every single day. Because if you don't live up to those values, you can't live up to them, everything crumbles.
I certainly will. Next time I say culture is about shared experience, I'll say it's about shared experience and values, and I think I will sound wiser.
Look at how defensive he is, Sophie. Right away, just defensive. No, but actually, so I'm actually like involved in a large organization that, and I actually totally agree. Like, so it's multinational. It's like, it's more complex. It actually gets even more complicated. But I actually agree that having on the very top the shared values, and that needs to be the thing that is our thing. That is who we are. Because then we go down, and everybody, they're different ages, because it's also like, you may be dealing more with young people. Like, we have like various different ages, different cultures from different places, and they should have their local thing that's okay. But like, as a company, having that, I actually agree that's the way to go. Okay, we've gone far and long on this one.
Sorry.
And you're busy.
It's great. It's brilliant. I mean, I really appreciate you taking all this time. I just feel like we should,
wrap up. I'll just say, before, and Kim typically does the wrap, so I'll just say that I'll post a link to another interviewee that was called Michal Szlewiński, who founded a company called Nozbe, which is it was a remote first company right from years and years ago, and he has a lot to say about how to run companies remotely, and there are links to his blog and stuff like that, and that'll be useful for our listeners if you want to know more about that. There's plenty you can find out from Google, but one of our past interviewees was founded a company which he made a feature of, and it was 10 or 15 years ago. He really started early, so I'll link to that. And so I'd like to echo Keeman's comment that this has been a longer than usual podcast, but a very interesting one. And Keeman, do you want to do the honors of the wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I just basically, I'm really impressed with what you're doing, and like, just personally, like I just personally am like, I hear where you're coming from, and I actually strongly believe in all this, like the education and sharing the education and democratizing the education. And so basically, I think there's so much to do here, and I think it's really cool what you're doing. And so like, I do encourage everybody listening to check out The Garden. And I mean, I basically like what you're doing. In terms of the wrap up, Richard, I'm making an executive decision here. I'm going short version here. Normally I go off and I literally name a whole bunch of people that help us make this podcast. I'm just going to say thank you, all of you, because I thank you every single episode. So thank you. You know who you are.
You'll be in the show notes.
It'll be in the show notes. And if you liked it, please like, subscribe, let everybody know that in the world that you love this and that other people should listen to this. And Sophie, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Great story.
Thank you very much.